Good morning, and thank you for joining us. As we begin today's event, I would like to acknowledge that Dalhousie University is located in Mi'kmaq, the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq, and I pay my respects to our elders. It is my pleasure to host today's event, and I am pleased to welcome alumni and friends joining the conversation this morning from across the country. First, let me introduce myself. My name on the screen, Anne McLellan, and some of you will know that I am the former chancellor of Dalhousie University. I am a graduate of Dalhousie University, a proud graduate of Dalhousie University with both an undergraduate degree and a law degree. And I am the first to say that when people ask me what Dalhousie means to me, Dalhousie made the rest of my life possible. So I owe an enormous debt of gratitude to Dalhousie University, as I'm sure so many of us as alumni do. I have had the opportunity to both be a legal academic and spend a considerable amount of time in public life, in politics, in the governments of Prime Ministers Chrétien and Martin. Today's conversation, ladies and gentlemen, is going to be about leadership. And what an important topic when you consider what we in this country and around the world have been through over these past 14 months. And we're not at the end of this unprecedented time in global history. And let me say that I could not be more pleased today to have two friends joining me to talk about leadership and their leadership challenges over these past 14 months or so, because they have been in one way or another at the very heart of the crisis with which we have been dealing. And they have been very high-profile leaders in their respective organizations and worlds over this past period of time. So, without further ado, let me introduce our two guests today. First, probably a woman who needs no introduction to Canadians, Dr. Bonnie Henry. Dr. Henry, we all feel as if we know you. We all feel as if we live with you, which should be a very frightening thought for you, probably. But Dr. Henry, early in this crisis, every day, I think maybe took a Sunday off, I'm not sure, but every day was talking to British Columbians primarily, but really to all Canadians about the crisis, what she was seeing on the ground in her province, British Columbia, but what she was seeing across the country and around the world. Some of you may not know that Dr. Henry is in fact a proud graduate of Dalhousie Medical School. And Dr. Henry, this is not the first crisis with which you have had to deal. In fact, Dr. Henry has dealt with crises such as the Ebola situation. And I know, Dr. Henry, you were also on the front lines of SARS when I was Federal Minister of Health. Welcome today. Let me say a couple of what I consider fun facts about Dr. Henry. First of all, she's probably the only chief medical officer in the country who has a pair of shoes named after her. And one of Canada's most famous designers, Flufog, in fact, designed the Bonnie Henry shoe. And I believe much of the proceeds from those shoes went to charity. But Dr. Henry, just another remarkable line on your CV. And also, Dr. Henry and her sister Lynn have just published a book, not surprisingly, the title of which is Be Kind, Be Calm, and Be Safe, with her as I say, with her sister Lynn, and this is the story of Dr. Henry's leadership journey over these past 14 months. Dr. Deep Saini. Dr. Deep, you are president of Dalhousie University. You couldn't have picked a more interesting time to arrive at Dalhousie University. I had the honor of being on the selection committee that chose Deep as the next president, the 12th, I believe, president of Dalhousie University. And Deep arrived on campus late January of last year, just in time to inherit, inherit's the wrong word, just in time to face the pandemic crisis with which we are all too familiar right now. But Deep, I've been watching some of your YouTube presentations. For those who don't know, Deep has a YouTube a show, let me call it that he does every now and then. You can watch it on YouTube. That's where I catch it. And in fact, it's called Deep Dive. And what he does in those shows is talk about Dalhousie, talk about the people of Dalhousie, the community in which Dalhousie is found, and the challenges and the opportunities. I encourage everyone who hasn't tuned in to Deep Dive to please do so, because it is an amazingly warm and humanizing look at what is happening at Dalhousie and the people who live and work and study there. I also know that Deep's quite the golfer. He's been known to lose the occasional Dal golf ball on the courses in and around the metropolitan area. And Deep has traveled across this country, studied and worked across this country now for some 40 years, I guess, Deep. And as you yourself have said, you've moved from west to east, and you feel that you are home. And what a lovely sentiment that is for all of us. So welcome to both of you. And as I've already said, our conversation is going to be about leadership. But before we begin our conversation, Deep, I'm going to ask you to say a few words.
Thank you, Anne, and good morning or good afternoon to everybody who is listening, depending on where you are. And thank you, Dr. Henry, also for joining us. It's just such a pleasure to sit with two of you together, two of the most illustrious Canadians that I've ever had the pleasure of getting to know. Before I go further, let me just share some of my thoughts about those across the country who have been impacted by the pandemic, and most importantly, the most recent spikes that are going on across the country, including here in Nova Scotia. It's important that we all look out for one another and continue to do our part to stop the spread of this really sneaky virus. As Anne mentioned, I've been at Dalhousie now just over a year, and what a year it's been. What a time I chose to come here. But then I look at it and say, well, despite all the challenges, where else would I want to be except in a place that I have adored for such a long time, and where I have now the honor and privilege of serving during this very difficult time. I'm truly honored and privileged to have joined this community as president of Dalhousie and have this fortune of contributing at a critical time. Let me also acknowledge the exceptional support that we have received this year from so many. That has made it clear to me that Dalhousie has a strong network of friends and supporters without whom our success would not be possible. In fact, without whom we would not exist. This network is not just here in Dalhousie, on the campus of Dalhousie, or in the city of Halifax, or in Nova Scotia, or across Canada. It is actually spread around the world. We have 150,000 alumni living in more than 150 countries around the world. And I want to thank you all for your help and encouragement during these particularly challenging circumstances. We continue to evolve to include new faculties, new departments, and new campuses here at Dalhousie. Yet, for all the growth, we remain a community united by a shared pride in what we achieve together and what we give back together. And that is actually even more important. What we give back together to the world around us This is a true fact now more than it has ever been in the history of Dalhousie, which is now 203 years. Just last week, our Board of Governors approved Dalhousie's latest new strategic plan. It is titled Third Century Promise, and that says everything. We are in our third century, and through this strategic plan, we have made a promise to our stakeholders. This plan is informed by extensive engagement with our communities, and it will shape our collective path forward as we move into the future. It is a promise of collective ambition, of our community and support, and of the long-term positive impact Dalhousie will have on Nova Scotia, Canada, and the world. Please stay tuned as we officially launch this new strategic plan later this spring. I look forward to working with you all in the months and years to come, and do so as we together write the next chapter of Dalhousie's compelling story. With your help, we will continue to raise our ambitions boldly higher. We will continue to serve our communities with even greater commitment and vigor, and take this university to its next level. Thank you.
Thank you, Deep, and we all look forward to the official launching of the new strategic plan as we quite literally step into this third century for Dalhousie University. As I've already mentioned, today's conversation is about leadership, and what a challenging time to be a leader in terms of your respective organizations or institutions than during this unprecedented time. And we throw around the language of unprecedented a lot, but truly, I think that it is an appropriate adjective for where you two and many others in this country find yourselves and themselves, because people keep referring back to 1918 and the Spanish flu as really the only global comparator that we have to what you two as leaders have been through, and many others in this country and around the world. So I'm sure everybody is interested in terms of your leadership journey over this period of time, these 14 months, and it's not over. But if you could throw your, cast your mind back to your headspace 14 months ago when you first heard those letters, COVID and COVID-19, and what you thought your challenges would be, and what these past 14 months have been like, and what you have learned about leading in this unprecedented, ever-evolving time when you get up one day and it's this, and then the next day it may be something else, which has to be really challenging for leaders like yourselves. So let me start with you, Dr. Henry. What have these past 14 months been like as you lead the healthcare professionals in your province and, quite honestly, provide key advice to elected officials?
Yeah, thank you. And thank you so much for being with you this morning. I just want to start by saying that I am on the traditional and unceded territories of the Lekwungen speaking peoples here in beautiful Victoria, in my kitchen, as a true maritimer would be. And I'm very grateful for the traditional keepers of this land, now known as the Esquimalt and the Songhees First Nations. And when I think about what we've come through in this last 14 months, and probably a little bit longer for people like me who were watching what was happening in China and getting more and more anxious as the year started last year. I do want to say that I am reminded by our First Nations leaders here in BC that the term unprecedented really doesn't apply to First Nations experience and Indigenous people's experiences of pandemics and other tragedies in the past. And it is a reflection of the strength and resilience of First Nations communities. And I must say that I look to that quite a lot, and I've learned so much from some of the really strong First Nations leaders here in British Columbia. in thinking of how we can get through this together. But when I look back to this time, well, actually to January and February of last year, I did have a lot of experience in my past of some of the things that I knew were coming up. And the thoughts that I had, and I think about it a lot now, that words matter, how we approach things matter, and to provide people with the information they need. And I've said this many, many times, that, if we tell people what we need them to do, we tell them why, and that talks to explaining the situation as best we can, what we know, what we don't know, but really importantly, giving people the means to do what we need them to do. Those are the things that will get us through this crisis. And, we have sayings in the Maritimes, things like common suffering builds strong bonds. And that is something that I go back to over and over again over this past year. We all are suffering in small ways or big ways. And that this pandemic has really exposed that we don't all experience that suffering equally. And so being aware of other people's, the dramas, the things that other people are going through, is what will help us as community and build resilience and get through these most challenging times. And it goes through waves and periods of stressors as well, which are sometimes related to the virus, but also related to the things that we're doing to control the virus in many more ways. So those are all things that on a daily basis, we have to find that balance of, what do we need to do to keep the virus down and to keep people whole and healthy going through this really stressful time.
Keith, how about you in terms of arriving at Dalhousie and quite literally having to make a decision to shut down a community of 19,000 students, or at least shut down their physical presence on campus in classes, and an enormous impact for the larger community of Halifax, the metropolitan region?
Yeah, thanks, Anne. And not just simply 19,000, actually closer to 20,000 students, and plus there is also about 6,000 employees.
Yeah.
So large community. So what were the thoughts that went through my mind? What helped at the time when we had to do that? And it's actually interesting how events that happened decades ago in your life can come to help you at the moment of crisis like this. And I point to, actually, if you can see, there's a picture of my dad that hangs behind here in my office. And there's a reason that picture hangs in my office, because my dad was a man who had left a very major and lasting imprint on my mind in the way I do things. And so, when the crisis erupted, we had really about 24 hours to react to a situation that was developing on a campus. And it was a suspected case of COVID-19 in one of our residences. Fortunately, it turned out to be a false alarm, but on that day, it did not look like a false alarm. The situation looked very grave. And remember, this is now March 2020, when the fear of this pandemic was far greater than it is today. We knew very little about this virus at that point. And the moment you heard one case in one of our residences, a student who had been using kitchen facilities, who had been using common washrooms and had been in contact with numerous other people, just the specter of what could happen was extremely scary. So we had to react very fast. We were one of the first universities in Canada to go online and shut down all operations on campus. I spoke with numerous people before we made the decision. Some were supportive, others were critical of the decisions we were about to make. And there were people who were questioning, what is it that this would have other implications and so on. So my answer to that at that point was something that, again, that's where I bring my dad. He inspired me at that moment when I was looking at that decision. And the inspiration was that he was a civil servant in India, a senior civil servant, and had to make a lot of difficult decisions in his life. And one of the things that I remember from his times was that always keep an eye on what is the long-term objective, what you have to do, and do what you have to do then within that context. And the context for us was, in the long run, we had to make sure that we don't endanger lives and that our institution does not end up suffering permanent damage. The immediate reaction was to save lives right there and then. That was akin to, what a firefighter would do if they entered a burning building. You would take a person and throw them out of the window if that would save their lives, and even if that ends up, hurting them, leaving them with a bruise or maybe perhaps a broken bone. So that was the reaction that we had at that moment, and the eye was on long-term safety of our community and the long-term health of the institution. The actions we had to take were immediate. How do we save lives? And my answer that came out to my critics at that point was that, look, it's entirely possible. We're going into the unknown. I could be making mistakes, but I'd rather make a mistake that saves lives rather than endangers them.
Mm-hmm. Can I build on that? Because I think you're absolutely right. And, I've said this many times before that, our task, the ethical, moral imperative that we have was to do just enough that would prevent people from dying from the virus with balancing the really harsh measures and the impact they have on people's lives. And we always would do too much or too little. And like you, early on in particular, I would rather have been accused, and I think I have been many times, of doing too much. Because when you don't know what the impact is going to be and you don't know a lot about the virus, then really erring on that side of doing too much at the beginning was more important. But you have to balance that with knowing that once you put measures in place, it's very challenging to walk them back. And we see that a lot. And that is, as a leader, that's one of the most difficult things, is being on that high wire balancing act for so long now. And nothing is ever perfect. And you're always trying to find that balance of too much or not enough. And it's very, very challenging. But early on, really taking extra measures is probably more important.
And when we look at where it hasn't been done, where the opposite approach was taken, look at the horrendous consequences, and not just here, but elsewhere in the world. Last year and a half has really proven what is the right approach and what's not the right approach. And maybe you have something to say about that, because you live in the political arena. Even though you retired from it, you still live in it.
Yes, I guess some days I would think that I still live in it a little too much. But I'm struck by what Dr. Henry's just said about this high wire act of doing enough but not too much. And I think you see that tension play out literally on the faces of our elected officials, right? Our premiers, the prime minister, cabinet ministers, other elected leaders, because they're I think the tension, my own experience, for example, going through SARS or even 9/11 when I was Attorney General and Minister of Justice, you don't want to overreact and have a major impacts on people's lives, communities' lives. Or with SARS, Dr. Henry, when the WHO shut down the city of Toronto, right? That was a decision I was incredibly critical of. And we got that shutdown lifted very quickly.
It was the timing of it that was wrong.
Exactly. The timing of it was wrong. If they were going to act, they should have acted much sooner. So that, we all three of us in different ways have lived out these events in very public ways where you are trying to get the balance right, but you are also working through that process in the glare of enormous publicity, where there are lots of critics And many of those critics I don't criticize because they don't have the information we have when we go about making our decisions. But it's leadership in that context where you know that balance is so important because the consequences can be so great is, I think, after a while, and you two have been through this now for well over a year, but not only you two, and I'm interested in your teams. You both have people with whom you work every day that you have to inspire, that you have to energize, because this is a long haul, unlike many other crises. A long haul. We don't know exactly where the end is. And you are working with a team of people. And I'm wondering what leadership skills, the approach you take to energizing that team, to keep the team feel confident that they're doing the right things.
Right. Maybe I can take a stab at that. The first thing is, for me, that you don't let the talk of crisis become a crisis in itself. I've used the term crisis 3 times, I think, so far, maybe 4. But when we talk within the institution, I think letting it become pervasively known across the campus that we are in a crisis is probably not a good thing. We are in an urgent situation. Things need to be done fast is important, but if you create a crisis mentality, you're going to be paralyzed by that. So there has to be a hope all the time. And that has to start with your most senior team, because you set the standards, you set the examples. The other thing, and I'll stop there, and because I want to hear Dr. Henry, who's managed this situation at a much larger scale. And that is, for me personally, I do remember my younger days when I believed in personal heroics, but at some point, mercifully, and I don't know when that point actually arrived, I got over that notion of personal heroics. And I discovered the value of team, because you have people around you who are brilliant. And in universities, by definition, we are surrounded by outstanding people. And you have to mine that outstanding bank of brains that you have around you. So if you take the approach that there are moments to lead from the front and there are moments to lead from behind, and the moment to lead from front is when you have to perhaps put yourself in the breach and take responsibility. Moment to lead from behind would be when you have to give credit to your people, when other people take the limelight. And that interplay, that's a constant interplay that keeps your team in a positive mood and inspired, and they continue to do the work. And you make sure that they are human beings too, and you recognize that, and that their health is looked after, and you make sure you constantly reach out to that they suffer just as much as anybody else does. As Dr. Henry said, all of us have suffered, but they're not allowed to show that they are suffering, but they are allowed to show it to you in your private lives, and so you have to be there for them as well.
I absolutely agree with you, and I wear the fact that I'm the face and the voice of a very strong team of public health and healthcare professionals, and every day. And I think staying relentlessly positive in our interactions despite what's happening, and we laughingly say that they say they're very happy that I'm out there being the dartboard, and they can be in anonymity in the background, really making the decision. So I think hope and humor. We have a lot of humor in our little world. We say every day, we say happy day, because nobody knows what day it is anymore. It's just another COVID day. But it really, as you talk about, patience, support, knowing that we're there for each other. And, the other group that I'm very connected with is my colleagues across the country, the Council of Chief Medical Officers of Health. And we've started having Sunday morning, we call them group therapy sessions, our Sunday morning meetings, where it's just us, and we talk about the things that we're dealing with and supporting of each other. And I really believe, and I've said this many times, but I believe kindness is that superpower that helps us get through these crises. And I also am reminded of Maya Angelou's one of her quotes, which is, I do what I do because I'm counting on you, counting on me. And that is how we try and work things in our team here, that people know that we're counting on each other, and that I try and represent them in everything I do, and to keep it positive and kind.
Let's be honest here and candid in the sense that you two are out there, and certainly you, Dr. Henry, almost every day. Deep, you're very much out in the Halifax community and in the Dal community. Criticism goes with leadership, right? And during this crisis, gosh knows, an awful lot of people have felt quite free to criticize, and Deep, you alluded to this earlier, criticize the decisions you have made, because they do have major consequences on people's lives. As leaders, how do you deal with the critics and the criticism? Some of it very high profile criticism, especially because of the world in which we live with social media, right? And your critics can be anonymous. I always found in public life, it was one thing if my critics attached their name to something and I could engage with them directly. In the world in which we live, my guess is many of your critics over this past 12 years, or 12 months rather, have been anonymous and making comments without really full or very much information at all. So I wonder how, as leaders, you take on board the criticism and work through that and help your teams work with the criticism too.
Yeah, it has been relentless. And as you say, there's this undercurrent, particularly on social media, of anonymous, and to the point where it's been threatening and hate in some cases, in my case. And it has meant that I have to have security in my house, and I can't go out by myself, which is really, really hard. It's hard for somebody who is an introvert and is used to, having, so it is isolating and sometimes very, very hurtful. But that is where having that close connection and strong bonds with our team is so important. And I have to give full credit as well to our Deputy Minister and Minister of Health, Minister Dix, because we are a very strong, connected team. We don't always agree on everything, and we have a safe space to be able to air all of the different really important things. But we've always been personally supportive of each other, and that makes a huge difference. And I have to say, as a woman in a leadership position, that has made me a target in a way that is probably not the same as male in leadership positions. So that has been very difficult sometimes and challenging.
I'm touched by what you just said, and I can't even imagine what it is like to go through what Dr. Henry, what you have gone through, and still are going through. So I'll keep that in mind as I make my comment, because one can easily cross the line. So I see the commentary that we get from public and critics in two categories. One, that is the reasonable criticism, and majority of it is of that nature. And then when it crosses the line to unreasonable and including threatening. So on the reasonable side, it's often people can be wrong, but they can still be reasonable. And I'll draw an analogy. For example, if I have to fire an incompetent employee, for me, it is about running an effective institution and running it effectively. For the person who's losing the job, they're losing the job. They don't care about the bigger picture. They care about that moment that they have a mortgage to pay and kids to send to school. So you have to keep that in mind, that you have to, so to speak, walk a mile through somebody else's brain. And so that's how I handle it, that when somebody criticizes me, I look at that where it's coming from. It's often coming from the fact that they don't know all the things I know, as you said earlier. We make decisions on the basis of complex set of factors, whereas that person is fixated on one issue, and that's a legitimate issue. The other side is what you just said, and the only way to deal with that is to be aware of it, but to put it aside and not manage based on an obsession with wanting to be popular, but manage with an obsession with making considered correct and right decisions.
No, I think you're right. When we think about it, and these are the things that I've learned in the many crises that I've been part of, is when people are in a crisis, they react in many ways. And for some people, they react in anger, and that's their way of dealing with uncertainty and anxiety. Some people react with paralysis, and they just can't do anything. And then there's a group of people that react with altruism. When something goes wrong, they want to give blood. They want to go out and support people. They bang pots at 7 o'clock to show the world that we're in this together. And I believe it's the way that we approach things that can help foster that altruism and help people dampen down that anger and anxiety reactions. And it comes with compassion, with talking directly to people, with being kind, with recognizing we don't know everybody's story. But even, those are the things that keep us going in these challenging times, recognizing that people are lashing out because they don't know how to deal with the uncertainty and the relentless uncertainty over the last year and a half.
I'm struck by the high degree of transparency that you both have brought to your decision making. And certainly that was a lesson I learned, Dr. Henry, coming out of SARS, that I, as minister, should have been a lot more transparent, not only about what we knew, but what we didn't know. And certainly I was, I think quite fairly, open to some constructive criticism from Dr. David Naylor and others about the importance of communication and transparency during a crisis. And certainly this one, of a much longer duration, probably makes it a little bit harder to be transparent and open. But I think both of you undoubtedly, and Dr. Henry, you especially, I mean, every day there's nowhere you hide, right? Because you're out there talking to British Columbians and Canadians. And that is reassuring. Even though the news is bad some days, I think it's so reassuring for people, one, to see you there, and two, to listen to what you have to say as you talk to people about what you know and what you don't know. And I just think that, and Deep, to you as well, I mean, being transparent about the decisions you made and taking those kids, those students out of classrooms and why you thought it was important. And I think it's a lesson. I know it's one that I learned the hard way during SARS, but I think it's a really important lesson for all of us in leadership positions, is that actually transparency and being open and telling people what we know and what we don't know is actually the way to go here, as opposed to not come out and talk.
And the things that, the other thing I find, and maybe Dr. Saini, you do as well, but the things that things evolve over time and they change. And I've been talking about science in action, that we actually are learning things day by day sometimes, and then that changes our approach. And people see change as failure, or you did something wrong, or you don't know what you're doing. So trying to put it out there that, no, we're learning and we're adjusting as we learn is important.
Yeah.
It's a bit like the difference between truth and lies. If you tell a lie, you have to always remember what lie you told. Whereas if you tell the truth, you never have to remember. Truth always remains constant. So communication is just like that. If you are transparent, you don't have to remember. You don't know what you said. You don't have to remember what you said last time, because you will say what is actually the fact. So I think that's helpful. And I think people, people who are not transparent, they ignore the fact that vast majority of people we deal with are very intelligent people, and they figure it out when you're not being transparent. When you're opaque or even translucent, people figure it out. And that is insulting to people. And it's best to give them the things as they are.
And I think I'm getting a little opaque here. The sun is coming in my kitchen.
That's okay. We can still.
I didn't get the light right here today. But it's absolutely true. It's and sometimes the anger comes because we don't want it to be what it is. And heaven knows right now, I don't want it to be still transmitting in our community, and I don't want it to be that we still have to do things like wearing masks and keeping away from people and not having social interactions. We want it to be different, and sometimes that leads to anger as well, and frustration, and we're tired of it, and we are tired of it.
Now, I see we have a question from a viewer in British Columbia, but I don't see the question on my screen. So, here's the question, like magic. The question is from Kathy. Good morning, all. Thank you for this really interesting coffee chat. I work in a municipality here in British Columbia, and have so much respect for Dr. Henry's leadership, and want to say we have embraced her message of kindness and calm as we lead our teams. My question is, how to continue to inspire and lead your teams through a crisis or event that seemingly has no end date?
Yeah, that is the challenge, and part of it is having a vision for the future, and we've been trying to do that, and now I believe we have a vision. The hardest period of time, really, well, every day is the hardest period of time as we keep going, but there was a period of time in January and February where our vaccine supply dried up, and we were right in the middle of this. And it seemed like the end was getting farther and farther away. But, we have the analogy, or I've been using the analogy. At one point it was an Ironman, but we're in the marathon part of it now. And we're in the last kilometers of the marathon. And that's hard. And I've run marathons. And it seems like, that last 10K is the second half of the marathon, not the last bit of it. And we are in there, and we need to, I think hope is really important, and I do believe we will get through this, and I believe there is a post-pandemic world where we live with COVID, and we're learning how to do that. But the most important things, and one of the things I've been most distressed about, is the negative narrative that is out there around immunizations. And for some reason, there was this whole, we're not getting enough, and you're not getting it out fast enough, and it's not good enough. And we have miraculous vaccines that work, and they work in elderly people, our seniors and elders. We can protect them, and we're learning that. And so that is part of what is going to get us to the end. So I think being able to have that vision and believe that we are going to get through it, and that there is a better place that we will get to, and we are getting there. It's just, as I've said as well, we're right in the middle of hard right now.
Yeah.
And let me restate what Dr. Henry said so elegantly in many words, that there is actually, it's not true that there is no end date to this. There is actually an end date. We just don't know yet what that end date is, but there is an end date.
Yeah, well, yes, you're right. But the problem is for all the planners out there, like Kathy in the municipality, wherever she is in British Columbia, it's hard to plan when you don't know, is that end date September 1st? Is it December 31st? I know for planners, well, and for governments and healthcare professionals, university presidents, not knowing what that end date is makes it an awful lot harder to plan. If you had an end date, Deep, you would know with certainty whether all your students could come back to campus in September, right?
No, I totally agree with that. Yeah, all I'm saying is that we cannot let go of the hope that there is an end.
Oh, no.
That's very important to remember. This is going to come to an end. The challenge is that we don't know exactly when. And it may not come to an end in the same way that we would like it to. No. It will come to an end in a different way.
And I do believe, though, that we can be a little bit more certain about that now. Okay, unless things change dramatically, right. We have seen in the UK in particular, which I watch closely, in Israel, which we've had the privilege of speaking with colleagues there, we can see in Canada us getting to a new place. I think the pandemic will end. Our lives with COVID will go on for some time, but they'll be different than they are now.
So I see, Dr. Henry Deep, that our time is coming to an end. I think this was a lively conversation, and I thank you both. But I wonder if both of you have one last thought about leadership. Anything you've learned, anything that surprised you in particular over this past year that you would like to share with our alumni and friends this morning?
I'll let Dr. Henry go first.
Oh, goodness. You know, just that we are all in this storm together. And I've said this many times, but we're not all in the same boat. And to recognize that it is our common humanity that will get us through this, that the virus is where we need to direct our anger, and it's the virus that has, rent things asunder, but it is our compassion and humanity that will pull us back together, and we can't lose sight of the inequities that have been exposed by what we've been through in the last year and a bit, and all of us need to commit to addressing those inequities, to understanding in a deeper way poverty and discrimination and how they drive disease, and making sure that we can build back better and more just.
That is a really important lesson, I think, that hopefully all of us have taken on board, especially our elected officials at all levels. Deep, over to you.
How could I add anything to that except perhaps to say that, I believe that this is, as ghastly as this crisis has been and continues to be, there are opportunities it offers. And the opportunity is, and I re-paraphrase what Dr. Henry said, that if we, after this, we ended up in exactly the same place where we were before we left, I think that would be the real tragedy. That would be a bigger tragedy than what we're going through. This is a huge opportunity for us to build a better world. And let's not forget that lesson. Let's not lose that lesson.
Wonderful insights from both of you as we conclude this conversation this morning. I want to thank you both so much for the time that you've spent with us, all of us, alumni and friends of Dalhousie across the country who tuned in. I think we may have gone a little bit over time. If so, I apologize to all the people running the show this morning. But what better note on which to end than what Dr. Henry has said over and over again in British Columbia and to all Canadians: be kind, be calm, and be safe. Thank you all very much and have a great day.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Anne. Thank you, Dr. Henry.
Thank you so much.
Bye.